For him, former MEP and Reform UK member Ben Habib. Benny, good afternoon. How are we?
Good afternoon. Very well indeed, thank you, Jeremy. What a nice chap Danny was.
How much did you pay him to say that, Habib? That's what I want to know.
I was speaking to your producer, made sure Danny got on just before I did.
Can I start slightly differently? We can talk all about Tories and Labour. Do you know, we've given a stat today. Immigration fuels the biggest UK population rise in the last 50 years, Ben. This is at the same time as this country freely admits it is skint, its public services are creaking, the way it looks after its old people, its veterans and people who have done their bit is, I think, bordering on the embarrassing. And yet, more and more come, highlighted by that dreadful story about the Albanian criminal. Did you hear that story today? Deported.
I did, absolutely.
Went to prison, deported as part of a deal with Albania, and basically came back, got married, made a woman pregnant, made a woman pregnant, married her, and under ECH law fact number 18.38-7, he has now rights as a family man to stay here. I just wanted to start by asking you this. The ECHR is such a hotbed of argument. Why can't sensible people realise it's not fit for purpose in 2024?
Well, you're absolutely right. The ECHR is completely out of control. You know, from 1959 to 1995, I think it adjudicated 850 cases, and then its court was restructured. And since 1995, I think 1998, the new restructuring came into place. But since then, it's issued 23,500 adjudications on all aspects of the way we live our lives, including net zero. You might recall the other day it found against the Swiss government because it wasn't doing enough to deliver net zero. So how does the policy of net zero have any influence one way or the other on human rights? The court is out of control. And we've got to find a way. Sadly, it's embedded in the fabric of our own legal system now. You know, Tony Blair put it effectively into the Human Rights Act. The Human Rights Act and the ECHR are now synonymous. So we've got quite a lot of weeding out to do. And one thing governments don't do, just as a slight aside, but I think they need to do much more of, is repealing laws, not constantly making new laws. Things work quite well, actually. As Danny was saying, when we were growing up, as you were indicating, things worked quite well when we were younger. We understood what was important in this country. We stood for this country. We had stronger borders. We understood the importance of culture. We were proud of our history, etc. What we need to do is restore as much as we need to reform. And we need to repeal. In order to restore, we need to be repealing laws.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? They managed to repeal the Rwanda law within 5 minutes of getting into power, the Labour government.
Is true.
There are many, many laws that are simply not fit for purpose. And the ECHR, this is where people like you and I rail against this, and I will continue to rail against it till they drag me out of this studio. We voted as a country, whether people will now say to me, oh, Brexit. The fact is 52% of this country voted to leave the European Union, yet the truth of the matter is we can't do anything we want because everybody like that Albanian criminal will grab a human rights lawyer who will charge the taxpayer 800 quid a day, find some stupid little paragraph within something that's not fit for purpose and basically stick two fingers up to the legal justice system in this country. Why aren't governments brave enough to say, look, it doesn't mean we don't care. What was it somebody said to me the other day, Ben? Only Belarus and Russia are in the ECHR.
It's such a stupid line. It's such a stupid argument, that. It's such a pathetic argument from people who haven't got anything better to say. Nor is the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand part of the ECHR. But I'm so glad you mentioned Brexit, because Brexit was a cry from the British people to restore at the heart of government the notion that the United Kingdom needs to be put first, that the national interest must be promoted and that British citizens' interest must be promoted. That's what the vote for Brexit was. And actually, we didn't get Brexit. We haven't taken back control of our laws.
Absolutely.
Indeed, the treaty that Boris Johnson signed with the EU commits us to staying in the ECHR. When I tweet stuff about the that treaty that Boris Johnson signed, and I say we can't leave the ECHR until we've terminated that treaty, people tweet back and say, you know nothing. The EU's got nothing to do with the ECHR. And absolutely right, it's got nothing to do with the ECHR. But somehow the EU managed to cow the British government into making a commitment to staying in it in the treaty that Boris Johnson drafted and signed. And so we can't get our freedom back. We will not be able to put this country first. We will not be able to put our borders back in place, be proud of our history, protect our culture, promote our economy for the benefit of British citizens. We can do none of that until we get Brexit. And so we've got to continue the fight for Brexit. As exhausted as people may be with the subject, actually it is critical for this country in order to leave the EU properly. We will not get what we all wish to have until we've achieved that hurdle. And so I'm going to be campaigning. I'm going to be campaigning vehemently. I've already started. But until the message drops into parliamentarians' heads that they've got to deliver that result, the vote that we made in 2016.
I completely agree. People will slag off Brexit. People have opinions. It divided the country. The truth of the matter is, interesting text from Susie. She says, tell Ben, you as well, Jez, to me, it feels like the ECHR are essentially running this country, because if we make a decision and somebody doesn't like it, somebody gets the law and changes it round. That Albanian story is utterly disgusting. And we go back every single day on this show and on this station about, and you said it, which I thought was brilliant, British citizens' interests. Apparently that's racist, Ben. Apparently you shouldn't say that, because what about all the other people? Well, there's a terrible phrase which will get me sorted, but I don't give a monkeys, really. I really don't. Charity begins at home. If I've got lots of money, right, more than I need to pay my family, I'll give money to charity. If I've barely got enough to feed and look after my family, why am I being forced to give it elsewhere? That doesn't make sense.
You're absolutely right. And you see with David Lammy appealing to the government to increase the foreign aid budget at a time when they're withdrawing winter fuel benefits from the elderly, by their own assessment. Thousands of old people are going to die over winter by their own assessment.
4,000 by their own assessment. I'm really glad, by the way, jumping in, that you brought that up, because I've said this for years. I've been slaughtered for it. During what was the austerity? There are 33 or 34 government departments. I know this to be a fact. Everybody lost money. The only department whose money from the exchequer went up every year, year on year, was the foreign aid budget. Now, for all the bedwetters, they'll say to me and you, Ben, oh, you're being unfair. What about, earthquakes in Pakistan and this, that and the other? And I go, yes, I'm sorry about that, but also, sorry, I want pensioners to be warm. I want veterans to have houses. I want kids to go to school. I want people to be able to get a doctor's appointment. Why is that fundamentally wrong to say that? Why do people say to me, that's just terrible, that's awful, you don't care?
But the reason that people like Starmer, but frankly the entire Labour Party, as far as I can see, champion foreign interests, the foreign aid budget, for example, and regard those of us who wish to put British citizens' interests first as racist. The reason they say that is because they don't really care about the country. They're seeing things from the global perspective, but they weren't elected by the globe for the betterment of the globe. If you don't believe in the United Kingdom, you don't really care about immigration. Who cares where people come from, whose interests are promoted, because you don't believe in the United Kingdom. But for those of us who do believe in the United Kingdom, and I believe firmly in the constitutional, democratic, economic unit that is Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Completely.
That is the unit which we should be protecting and promoting. And people like Starmer don't believe it. And I've been saying for a while, and again I'm going to continue to say it, that Keir Starmer is anti-British. That Lammy is anti-British. These people who would appeal for the foreign aid budget and withdraw support from British people, well, how can you interpret that action as anything other than anti-British?
I completely agree, and I would go a little bit further, because I always feel brave when you're with me. For people coming to this country because it's such a wonderful place, and this will resonate with a lot of people and will create... this is just what I feel, and I've thought it for many, many years. Why do we get people coming to this country because apparently it's so good, and then verbally, physically, knocking it, destroying it, wanting to change its history, wanting to change how it does what it does. If we're such an attractive proposition, come here and enjoy it if you're allowed and if you've got a reason. Don't come here and try and change it. Go back to where you came from. Because if you don't like this country, I don't want you here.
And you've hit another very important nail on the head. You know, immigration 30, 40 years ago, immigrants who came to this country came here because they valued this country, and through this country they wanted to better themselves, but they were not opposed to the country. The form of immigration that we've been practicing, and as you said, you know, we've had more immigration in the last 25 years than we've had in all of history before that. The form of immigration we're now practicing is taking people into this country who actually hold this country in contempt, who don't like our values, who want to take over our values. And in the pursuit of our liberalism, we've put a protected blanket around these people and said, fine, you don't like our values. We will allow you to continue not to like our values. We will make no attempt to integrate you. We will celebrate your cultures. We'll promote your cultures. You go about and do whatever it is you wish to do in your cultural silo, and we will take the knee to you. We'll rewrite our history to make you feel comfortable. We'll dumb down our cultural values to make you feel comfortable. We'll cease to be the Christian country we used to be to make you feel comfortable. And all of this is in the false pursuit of liberalism. The individual has become so important that they can hold any view, as awful as it might be, antipathetic to this country as it might be, and yet they have a right to hold it. It's the same problem we've got with the trans ideology. You know, an individual now is so important that their belief of whether they're a woman, a man, a dog, or whatever it is they wish to identify themselves as, trumps common sense. You know, that's how, I mean, it's almost end of civilization stuff, Jeremy. You know, it's absurd.
Listen, Kate in Harrogate speaks for many. I wish Ben Habib was running the country. Jacqueline in Bournemouth, please you have Ben Habib on, Jez. I believe in him. He talks so much sense. Rob in Brighton, they need to understand that Ben Habib needs to be in a position where we can listen to him more. Mate, it's always a pleasure. I could sit and listen to you all day because you speak common sense, and that's what this station's about. The amazing Ben Habib.